The little girl was already halfway across the road when Natasha Okoro started running. No thought, no decision, only her umbrella spinning into the gutter, her shoes slapping wet asphalt, and a black truck bearing down on a child in a yellow raincoat who would not move. Natasha hit her at a full run, folded her small body into her chest, and twisted so her own shoulder took the pavement. The horn screamed. Diesel and Shadow roared past, then silence, and rain. The child blinked up at her, enormous dark eyes, a doll's face, and not one tear in them. Nothing at all. "Are you hurt?" Natasha whispered. "Look at me, sweetheart. Look at me." The girl looked, and said nothing. Her name was Seo-yun. She hadn't spoken in 8 months. Not since her mother died, not since her father, Kang Tae-jun, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul, buried the only warmth in that house. And the stranger holding her? She wasn't there by accident. She'd crossed an ocean, carrying a dying woman's secret. Welcome to your favorite place for Afro-Korean stories. Besties, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below where you are watching from and what time it is over there. If you're here for romance, powerful mafia bosses, and unforgettable plot twists, I have something just for you. My Ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection gives you 15 stories, 20 audiobooks, and 5 exclusive bonus stories available only through the collection. Simply click the link in the description. Or if you're watching on a TV, pause the video and open your phone's camera and point it at the QR code on your screen. It takes just seconds. Now, let's begin. The gates of the estate burst open before Natasha had even gotten to her knees. They came down the drive in dark suits, 4 of them, moving with the fast, silent efficiency of men who were paid to move exactly that way. And Natasha understood at once that these were not ordinary men, and this was not an ordinary house. They fanned out around her without a word. One crouched to the child. One spoke low and urgent into a radio. 2 of them looked at Natasha the way you look at a threat you have not yet decided how to handle. And one of those 2 let his jacket fall open just enough that she saw the shape holstered against his ribs, and she felt her mouth go dry. "She ran into the road," Natasha said quickly, lifting both her empty hands where they could see them. "There was a truck. She was going to be hit. I'm not." Seo-yun. The man crouched by the girl said the name like a prayer and a scolding at once, cupping the child's face, checking her for blood. "Seo-yun, how did you get outside? How did you get past the gate?" The little girl, Seo-yun, did not answer him either. She only turned her head, slowly, and looked back up the hill toward the great gray house behind the gates. And something in the way she looked at it made Natasha's chest tighten. It was not the look of a child who had escaped somewhere fun. It was the look of a child staring at a place she was not sure she wanted to return to. Then a voice came down the drive that changed the temperature of everything. "Move." The 4 men in suits parted like water, and a 5th man walked through them. He was not large, but the space around him behaved as though he were. He wore a charcoal coat unbuttoned over a dark shirt, no tie, and the rain seemed almost to avoid him, beating on his shoulders and refusing to touch his face, which was still and sharp and terribly, deliberately controlled. He was perhaps 38. He walked without hurry even now, even toward a child who had almost died. And Natasha realized that his refusal to hurry was itself a kind of violence, a message to everyone watching that nothing was permitted to make this man run. But his eyes betrayed him. When he reached Seo-yun and went down on one knee in front of her, right there on the wet stone in his expensive coat, his eyes were wide and stripped and afraid. Seo-yun. He did not touch her at first. He held his hands just above her shoulders, trembling, as if he had forgotten how. Appa's here. Appa's here now. The child looked at her father with those same flat, faraway eyes, and said nothing. Something crossed the man's face then. Something that Natasha, who had spent 9 years as a pediatric nurse watching parents at the worst moments of their lives, recognized instantly and completely. It was the particular agony of a parent whose child has stopped reaching back. He gathered his daughter against him, and the little girl allowed it, went limp and unresisting in his arms, the way a doll allows itself to be held, and over the top of her small dark head, the man finally looked up at Natasha. "Who are you?" he said. It was not a question. It was a demand, cold as the rain. "My name is Natasha Okoro," she said. "I was across the street. I saw her run. I'm a nurse. I was a nurse. I only wanted to make sure she wasn't. You put your hands on my daughter. I stopped a truck from putting a great deal worse than my hands on her," Natasha said, and she heard the flint come into her own voice, and could not stop it, because she had never in her life been able to stand quietly by while someone frightened a child, and this man's men, with their guns and their flat eyes, were frightening this child badly, whether they meant to or not. "She's in shock. Look at her. She's not crying, and she's not talking, and her pupils are wide. She needs to be kept warm, and she needs to be watched tonight, and she needs somebody to hold her who isn't afraid to." The 4 men in suits went very still. One of them took half a step toward her. The man on the ground lifted one hand, barely, 2 fingers, and the man stopped as if he'd hit a wall. For a long moment, Kang Tae-jun, head of the Baeko, the White Tiger, the oldest and most feared syndicate in the city, a man whose name was spoken carefully even by other dangerous men, knelt in the rain and looked at the tall black woman who had just spoken to him as though he were an ordinary frightened father and not the most powerful criminal in Seoul. No one spoke to him that way. No one had spoken to him that way in a very long time. And in the circle of his arms, his silent daughter, who had not made a sound in 8 months, who had not smiled or spoken or wept since the morning they told her that her mother was never coming home, turned her head, slowly, and looked at Natasha. And her small hand, the one that had been hanging limp at her side, opened. It was nothing. It was almost nothing. It was a child's hand opening, the fingers uncurling like a flower deciding, after a long winter, that it might consider spring. But Kang Tae-jun saw it. He saw it the way a man dying of thirst sees water. His breath caught. His eyes flew to his daughter's face, and then to Natasha's, and something enormous and dangerous and desperate moved behind his controlled features, and Natasha did not yet understand what she had done or what it would cost her. "Bring her inside," Tae-jun said, rising, lifting the child with him. He did not look at Natasha again. "And bring the woman." It was not an invitation. The house on the hill was colder inside than out. That was Natasha's first thought, as they walked her through the enormous front doors and across a marble entry hall that echoed under her ruined shoes. Everything in it was beautiful and gray and silent. There were fresh flowers on a table by the door, white lilies, arranged with terrible care, and Natasha knew the meaning of white flowers arranged like that in a Korean home, knew it in her bones, and her eyes went to them and stayed there a beat too long. Somebody in this house had died. Somebody in this house was still being mourned. They took the child away up a wide staircase, a housekeeper appearing from nowhere to receive her, and Seo-yun went without protest, without a backward glance, and Natasha watched her small yellow raincoat disappear around the landing, and felt an ache she had no right to feel. And then she saw the boy. He was standing at the top of the stairs, half hidden behind the banister, watching. He looked exactly like his sister, the same doll's face, the same enormous eyes, and he was exactly her size. And Natasha understood, before anyone told her, that these were twins. He watched his sister be carried past him, and he watched the strange woman, standing dripping in his father's front hall, and his small face held the same nothing, the same terrible flat calm. Two children who had turned themselves off like lamps. Two children waiting in a cold gray house for something none of the adults around them seemed able to give. The boy's eyes met Natasha's across all that distance, and she did something she would question for a long time afterward. She lifted her hand, just slightly, off her side, and she opened it, palm out, fingers spread, the same gesture his sister had made in the rain, offered back to him. "I see you. I'm not afraid of you. You're not alone in there." The boy stared. His small fingers, wrapped around the banister rail, tightened, and then, so faintly that she might have imagined it, his lips parted, as though there were a word behind them he had forgotten how to say. "Min-joon." A man's voice, sharp. "Bed now." The boy vanished, and Natasha turned to find Kang Tae-jun watching her from the doorway of a study, having watched the entire silent exchange, his face unreadable, a glass of something amber in his hand that he was not drinking. "Sit," he said. She sat. The study was walled in books no one read, and photographs turned face down. All of them. Every framed photograph on every shelf had been laid on its face, so that the room was full of the blank cardboard backs of pictures, dozens of them, a whole life turned away from the light. Natasha looked at them and understood that too. You did not turn a photograph face down because you had stopped loving the person in it. You turned it face down because you loved them so much you could not bear to be seen by them. "You were a nurse," Tae-jun said. He stood by the window, his back half to her, watching the rain. "Where?" "Chicago, then Seoul, for the last 3 years. Children's cardiac unit mostly." Natasha chose her words with care, aware of the men standing at the edges of the room, aware of the gun she had seen. "I don't work in a hospital anymore." "Why not?" The question was a blade, and she felt its edge. There were true answers to that question, and there were safe answers. And for reasons she did not fully examine, she gave him a true one. "Because I lost someone," she said quietly. "And after that, I couldn't stand at the foot of another bed and tell another family that everything was going to be all right, when I didn't know if it was true." Tae-jun turned. For the first time he looked at her not as a threat or a servant, but as a person, and the look lasted only a moment before he shuddered it away. But Natasha had seen it, and she knew that whatever else this man was, he was drowning. "My daughter," he said, "has not spoken in 8 months. Neither has my son. The finest doctors in this country have examined them. Specialists have been flown in from Seoul, from Tokyo, from Vienna. They tell me the children are not damaged. They tell me their throats work, their minds work, that there is nothing wrong with them that they cannot see." His jaw tightened. "They tell me to be patient, as if patience were a thing I had not already given until there was nothing left of it. 8 months, Ms. Okoro, 240 days, and in all that time, not one of those brilliant, expensive people made either of my children so much as look up." He set the untouched glass down on the desk with a click that was very loud in the quiet room. "And then a stranger falls on my daughter in the road, and my daughter opens her hand." Natasha said nothing. She understood now why she had been brought inside, and she understood that she was in more danger, sitting in this warm chair, than she had been in the road in front of the truck. "I don't know why she responded to me," Natasha said honestly. Children in grief sometimes. I am not interested in why. Tae-jun crossed the room and stood over her, and this close she could see that he had not slept, that the control on his face was held together with wire and will. I am interested in the fact that she did. My children are the only thing in this world I have left that I have not already ruined. I would burn this city to the ground before I would let them spend one more day inside that silence. He looked at her, and his voice dropped, and what was underneath it frightened her more than any gun. You are going to stay in this house. You are going to help them. Name your price. That's not. Natasha stood, because she could not bear to be loomed over, and now they were close, too close, and she could smell the rain in his coat and the sleeplessness on him. That's not how grief works. You can't hire it away. And you can't keep me here like, I have a life. You have a rented room in Itaewon that you have not been able to make the payment on for 2 months. Tae-jun said, a work visa that expires in 6 weeks, and no family in this country, and, according to what I am able to learn, very little left in the one you came from. You have been in Seoul for 3 years, running from something. I do not know yet what it is. His dark eyes held hers. But I know a person who is running when I see one. It takes one to know one. The blood left Natasha's face, not because he had money enough to have looked into her, though the speed of it chilled her, but because he was right, and because there was one thing he did not know, one thing buried so deep that no amount of his money could dig it up. And it was the very thing that had brought her to stand outside his gates in the rain in the first place. Her hand rose, without her permission, to her throat, to the thin silver chain there, to the small locket that hung against her breastbone, warm from her skin, that she had not taken off in 8 months and 1 week. Tae-jun's eyes followed the movement, narrowed, very slightly. What is that? It's nothing, Natasha said. It was my mother's. It was the first lie she had told him. It would not be the last. They gave her a room that night, a guest suite larger than any apartment she had ever lived in, with a bed like a cloud, and a bathroom of black marble, and a window that looked down over the sleeping lights of the city. She had crossed an ocean to hide inside. A housekeeper brought her dry clothes and a tray of food she did not touch. The door was not locked, but when Natasha opened it and looked down the long dark hallway, she saw a man in a dark suit sitting in a chair at the far end, and he looked up at her, and she closed the door again. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed for a long time in a house full of grief and men with guns. And finally, when the last light under her door had gone dark and the great house had settled into its silence, Natasha reached up with shaking fingers and unclasped the chain from around her neck. She held the locket in her palm. It was old and worn smooth, and it did not open easily, because she almost never let herself open it. But she opened it now. Inside was a photograph, cut small to fit, of a beautiful Korean woman, with kind eyes and a wide, unguarded smile. A smile Natasha had seen for the first time and the last time on the same terrible night, in a place that smelled of antiseptic and blood, under fluorescent lights that never turned off. A woman whose hand had gripped Natasha's own with the last strength in her body, whose lips had shaped 4 words that Natasha had crossed an ocean and waited 8 months and stood outside an iron gate in the rain to keep. Find them, protect them. And across from the photograph, folded so many times it was nearly falling apart, was a scrap of paper in a dying woman's handwriting. And on it were 2 names. Seo-yun, Min-joon. Natasha closed the locket. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had found them. After 8 months, after everything, she had finally, impossibly found them. The children the dying woman had begged her to protect. The children of the man asleep somewhere in this house of turned-down photographs. But the woman in the locket had not died in any accident. Natasha knew that. She was perhaps the only person alive besides the killer who knew that. And she knew one more thing. The thing that made the marble room feel suddenly very small and very cold. The woman in the locket had not been afraid of dying. In those last minutes, with her life running out between Natasha's fingers, she had been afraid of only one thing. And when Natasha had leaned close and asked her, "Who did this to you? Who do I protect them from?" the beautiful woman with the kind eyes had looked toward the door as if the danger might already be standing in it, and she had used the very last breath in her body to answer. She had named someone inside her own home. She did not sleep. And when the gray dawn came up over the city, she was still sitting on the edge of the bed with the locket closed in her fist, and someone was knocking. Not the polite knock of a servant. 3 flat blows, spaced like a countdown. Natasha slid the chain back over her head and dropped the locket beneath her collar before she opened the door. And the man standing in the hallway was not one she had seen the night before. He was perhaps 40, lean as a blade, with a face that had been handsome once before something went out of it. He wore his dark suit the way the others wore theirs, but where the others had watched her with suspicion, this man watched her with nothing at all, which was worse. "You're awake," he said. "Good. The children eat at 7. You'll want to see how it goes before you make any promises you can't keep." He did not introduce himself. He turned and walked, expecting her to follow, and she did. And as they went down the wide staircase, he spoke without looking back. "My name is Jang Do-hyun. I have served this family for 20 years. I was here before the wife. I will be here after you." A pause, precisely measured. "You should understand what that means." "It means you don't want me here," Natasha said. "It means I don't trust things I can't explain," Do-hyun said. "And I cannot explain you. A stranger who happens to be standing outside our gate at the exact hour our daughter slips it, who happens to be a children's nurse, who happens to be the first person in 240 days to reach a child no one else could reach." He stopped at the foot of the stairs and turned, and up close, his eyes were flat and clear and terrible. "In my experience, Ms. Okoro, when a thing happens that is too convenient, it is because someone arranged it to happen. I intend to find out who arranged you. If the answer is no one, if you are only a coincidence, then I will apologize, and I will protect you with my life, because that is my job." He let that sit. "But if the answer is someone, if you have come into this house carrying someone else's knife." He did not finish it. He did not have to. Natasha held his gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say, and because he was right, and the only mercy was that he was wrong about which someone. The breakfast room was full of light and empty of sound. The twins sat side by side at an enormous table, so small against it that their feet did not reach the floor, and in front of each of them was a bowl of rice porridge, going cold and untouched. Seo-yun in a pale dress, Min-joon in a small gray sweater, both of them staring at nothing with those same doll's eyes. A young woman in an apron stood against the wall, hands folded, and by her face, Natasha could see that she had stood there like this every morning for 8 months, watching 2 children not eat, and that it had broken some small thing inside her too. And at the head of the table sat an old man Natasha had not seen the night before. He was perhaps 70, silver-haired, dressed in soft, expensive clothes, with a round, kind face and deep laugh lines around his eyes. And he was the only person in the room who seemed at ease. He was peeling a pear with a small knife, slowly, and laying the slices on a plate, and he looked up when Natasha entered, and gave her a smile of such genuine warmth that she felt herself, absurdly, wanting to trust him. "So this is our guest." He set down the knife and rose, and he crossed the room and took both her hands in his soft, dry ones, as if she were a niece come home. "The woman who saved our Seo-yun. I am Kang Byung-ho, Tae-jun's uncle, though I raised him more as a son. God help us both." His eyes crinkled. "Sit, sit. You'll forgive Do-hyun. He frightens everyone. It's the only thing he's good at." He said it fondly, and Do-hyun, by the door, did not react at all. "Me, I take a different view of a woman who runs in front of a truck for a child who is not hers. I take the view that heaven does not send such people by accident." He did not know how close he had come to the truth. Natasha made herself smile back. She sat between the twins. She did not try to feed them. She did not coax them, or brighten her voice, or do any of the things the exhausted young woman by the wall had clearly been made to do 1,000 times. Natasha had learned, in 9 years and 1 unbearable night, that a grieving child can smell performance the way an animal smells fear, and that the only thing that reaches them is the thing adults are most afraid to offer, which is stillness. So she simply picked up her own spoon and ate her own porridge, slowly, beside them, and she let the silence be, and she waited. It took a long time. The old man watched, curious. Do-hyun watched, unblinking, and then Seo-yun, without turning her head, without any expression at all, picked up her spoon and put 1 small bite of porridge into her mouth. The young woman by the wall made a sound and pressed her fingers to her lips. Natasha did not react. She did not praise the child or exclaim or make it into an event, because to a child who has locked herself inside a room made of grief, applause is only proof that she is being watched, and she will lock the door again. Natasha simply ate her next bite, and beside her, Seo-yun ate hers, and across the table, Min-joon watched his sister with those enormous eyes, and something moved in his face, some small flicker of the thing that had been switched off, and Natasha understood that whatever she did with one of these children, she was always doing with both. The old man was weeping, quietly, into his pear. 8 months, he whispered. 8 months, and you? He shook his head and could not finish. He seemed, in that moment, exactly what he appeared to be, a heartbroken old man who loved these children more than his own life. Natasha filed the moment away and did not know, yet, that she would need it. Kang Tae-jun did not come to breakfast. Natasha learned, over the days that followed, that he almost never did, that he left before the children woke and returned after they slept, and that this was not cruelty, but its opposite. A father who could not bear to sit at that table and watch his children not eat, who had chosen to love them from a distance because the distance was the only place he could keep from breaking apart in front of them. She learned the shape of the house and the shape of its grief. She learned that there were rooms she was not permitted to enter, and men who followed her at a distance whenever she moved, and that Jang Do-hyun's flat, clear eyes were on her more often than not. And she learned the twins. She learned that Seo-yun was the braver of the two, the one who tested the edges of the world, who had walked into a road not to die. Natasha came to believe, but because some part of her had wanted, desperately, for someone to come running, and she learned that Min-joon was the watcher, the one who held his sister's fear for her, who had appointed himself, at 6 years old, the guardian of a household that had no idea it was being guarded by a child. He did not sleep well. Natasha found him some nights standing in the dark hallway outside his sister's door, keeping a watch that no one had asked him to keep, and she did not send him back to bed. She sat down on the floor of the hallway beside him, her back against the wall, and she kept the watch with him, and neither of them said a word. And in the morning, she would wake stiff and cold on the floor, with the small boy asleep against her shoulder. She did not tell Tae-jun about the hallway. It felt like something that belonged to Min-joon. But Tae-jun found out anyway. She came awake one night on the hallway floor, Min-joon's small weight warm against her, and there was a shape in the dark at the end of the corridor. And her whole body seized before she understood that it was him. He was standing very still, his tie gone, his collar open, a man returned from whatever a man like him did in the small hours of the city, and he was looking at his son asleep on the shoulder of a woman he had known for 11 days. He crossed the hall without a sound and lowered himself to the floor across from her, his back against the opposite wall, and for a long time he said nothing. In the dark, his face had lost its armor. "He hasn't slept through the night since," Tae-jun said at last, very low. "Since. I would come home and find him standing here, guarding a door. I would carry him back to bed, and he would be up again within the hour." He looked at the boy. "I stopped coming down this hallway. I couldn't." He stopped. "I told myself I was giving him space. The truth is, I was a coward in my own house. Grief makes cowards of braver people than you think you are," Natasha said softly. His eyes came up to hers. "You speak to me," he said, "as though you are not afraid of me. Do you know that no one has done that in 15 years? Not my men, not my uncle, not even—" His jaw worked. "Even she learned, in the end, to choose her words with me. And I let her. That is the worst of it. I had a wife who was afraid to say true things to me, and I told myself it was respect." "What was her name?" Natasha asked, though she already knew it, though the knowing of it sat like a stone against her breastbone. "Yuna," he said, and the name in his mouth was a wound he had never let anyone watch him press. Han Yuna. He looked at Natasha, across the sleeping body of their son, and something passed between them in the dark that neither of them had permission to feel. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have liked that you are not afraid." Then he rose, and the armor came back over his face, like a door closing, and he carried his son to bed with a tenderness that did not match anything else about him, and he did not look at Natasha again. But she sat awake against the cold wall long after he had gone, one hand pressed to the locket beneath her collar, and she understood that she was in a kind of danger now that had nothing to do with the men and their guns. It was in the second week that she found the window. She had noticed that each evening, just before the light failed, both children grew restless and drifted, as if pulled by a string, to the same place. A tall window on the landing that looked down the long drive to the iron gate. They would climb up onto the padded seat beneath it, side by side, and they would watch the gate. Not playing, not talking, watching. And when full dark came and the gate stayed shut, some light in them would go out again, and they would climb down and let themselves be led to bed. Natasha watched them do it 3 evenings in a row before she understood, and when she understood, she had to leave the landing and stand in the bathroom with the water running so that no one would hear her. They were waiting. She asked the young woman in the apron, whose name was Mi-ran, and Mi-ran told her in a whisper, glancing at the doors, that after the accident, no one had been able to say the words to the children, that the master had tried and could not, that in the end it was the old uncle, kind Byung-ho, who had gathered them onto his lap and told them, gently, that their mother had gone away on a very long journey across the sea, and that they must be brave and good, and wait for her, and that if they were very good, the waiting would go faster. He meant it kindly, Mi-ran whispered, wringing her apron. He couldn't bear to tell them she was. He thought it would be softer, But now, her eyes filled. Now they wait. Every night, for 8 months, they have been at that window, waiting for her to come home from a journey. And no one can bring themselves to. She could not finish either. Natasha stood very still in the beautiful cold house and understood, at last, the full shape of the thing she had walked into. These children had not stopped speaking because they had given up. They had stopped speaking because they were being good. Because they had been told that if they were good and brave and patient, their mother would come back to them across the sea. And so they had made themselves into the 2 best, bravest, most patient children in the world. And they had been waiting, at that window, every single night, for a woman who was ashes in a garden of remembrance across the city. And Natasha Okoro was the only living person who had held that woman's hand as she died. She meant to tell Tae-jun. She had gone so far as to stand outside his study door, with her hand raised to knock, the truth of the window burning in her throat, because a father had a right to know that his children were waiting for a ghost. But she had not known how to say it without saying the rest, without the whole locked room of her own secret cracking open. And so she had lowered her hand and walked away, and she would carry the shame of that for a long time. The next evening she went to the window before the children did. She was sitting on the padded seat when they came, and they stopped in the doorway, the 2 of them, uncertain, because she was in their place, in the place that belonged to the waiting, and Natasha did not get up. She patted the seat beside her, and after a long moment, Seo-yun climbed up on one side of her and Min-joon on the other, and the 3 of them looked down the long drive to the gate together, and the light began to fail. "You come here every night," Natasha said quietly. Not a question. She had learned not to ask them questions, which required answers, which required the words they had given away. She only spoke, gently, into the space beside them, and let them decide whether to come out to meet her voice. "You watch the gate. You're waiting for someone." The children did not move, but she felt Min-joon go very still against her side, the particular stillness of a child listening with his whole body. "I think," Natasha said, and her voice was not quite steady, "that you are waiting for your mother, because someone told you she went on a journey, and that if you were good, she would come home." Beside her, Seo-yun's small hands had knotted themselves in the hem of her dress. "I want to tell you something," Natasha said, "about being good, and about waiting." She looked down at the gate, and she thought of a woman's hand in hers, and a woman's last 4 words, and she made the hardest choice of her life, which was to tell these children not the whole truth, which would have shattered them, and not the kind lie, which had already broken them, but the one true thing she could give them that might set them free. "You have been so good," she whispered. "You have been the 2 best, bravest children in the whole world, and I need you to hear me, because it is very important. Your mother did not need you to be good so that she could come home. Your mother is not staying away because you weren't good enough. Nothing." Her voice broke, and she let it break, because the children needed to see that it was allowed to break. Nothing you did or didn't do could ever have kept her away. She loved you more than the whole sky. Do you understand me? Wherever she is not waiting to see if you're good. She already knows. She has always known. You were always, always good enough. For a moment the whole world held its breath. And then Seo-yun, who had not made a sound in 251 days, turned her face up to Natasha's, and her doll's eyes were no longer blank. They were full, brimming, an ocean rising behind them, and her small mouth opened, and in a voice like a rusted hinge, a voice that had not been used in so long it had almost forgotten itself, she asked the one question that Natasha Okoro would have crossed the ocean 1,000 times over never to have to answer. Then why? Seo-yun whispered. Isn't she coming back? Natasha gathered both children into her arms and held them, and she did not answer the question, because there was no answer she could give that would not either break them or damn her. And so instead, she did the only thing left to a person who has run out of words. She held on, and Seo-yun broke, 8 months of held breath breaking all at once, and began to sob. Great ragged tearing sobs, the grief of a lifetime crammed into a body too small to hold it. And Min-joon, at Natasha's other side, watched his sister weep, and his own face crumpled, and he made a sound too, a single cracked syllable, the first sound anyone had heard from him since the morning the world ended. "Nona," he whispered, "sister," and reached across Natasha's lap for Seo-yun's hand. And the three of them stayed at the window while the last light died over the city, holding on, and no one came through the gate. And for the first time in 8 months, the children were not waiting for anyone, because someone was already there. Before we continue, a quick note for everyone who loves these Mafia Boss romance stories. I've bundled 20 of our most loved Afro-Korean romance stories into the ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. You'll get all 15 complete stories, 20 audiobook versions, plus 5 exclusive bonus stories you won't find on YouTube. Click the link in the description below, or scan the QR code by pausing the video, opening your phone's camera, and pointing it at your TV or screen. Your next favorite romance could be waiting for you before this story even ends. Natasha did not hear the study door open at the far end of the landing. She did not see Kang Tae-jun standing in the dark of the hallway, home early for once, frozen, one hand against the wall, listening to his daughter's voice for the first time in 251 days. She did not see the tears running down the face of the most feared man in the city, or the way he pressed his fist against his mouth so that the children would not hear him and stop. But someone else saw all of it. At the bottom of the stairs, unseen by them all, Jang Do-hyun stood in the shadows with a folder in his hand, and he watched the woman hold the master's weeping children, and he looked down at the papers he had spent 2 weeks assembling: hospital duty rosters, a staff photograph, an emergency room admission log from a night 8 months ago, and his flat, clear eyes moved from the woman on the landing to the name circled in red on the page in his hand, and his jaw tightened. He had found what he was looking for. He had found the lie in her, and he turned and started up the stairs to end it. He caught her arm on the landing, hard, and steered her through the nearest door before she could make a sound, into a dark, unused sitting room, and he shut the door and stood against it so she could not leave. "Sit down," Do-hyun said. "Let me go. Sit down, Miss Okoro, or whatever your name is." He tossed the folder onto a low table between them, and it fell open, and even in the dim light, she could see the photograph clipped to the top page, a hospital identification badge, her own face 2 years younger, the name beneath it, and the logo of St. Agnes Trauma Center. "Sit." She sat. There was no longer any point in running. She had known this moment was coming from the instant she stepped through the gate. She had simply prayed it would come after she had done what she came to do, and not before. Do-hyun pulled a chair around and sat across from her, close, his forearms on his knees, and his flat, clear eyes did not blink. "8 months ago," he said, "the wife of the man I have served for 20 years died on a mountain road. Her car left the highway on a curve she had driven 1,000 times, in dry weather, in daylight, and went down 200 meters into a ravine. She was declared dead at St. Agnes Trauma Center at 4:51 in the afternoon." He let that hang. "You were on shift at St. Agnes that day. You were, according to this roster, one of 2 nurses in the trauma bay when she was brought in. And then, 3 weeks later, you resigned from a career you had spent 9 years building. You moved out of your apartment, and you began, according to your landlord in Itaewon, sitting alone in the dark. Until 11 days ago, when you appeared outside our gate. He tilted his head. So I am going to ask you one time, and your answer will decide the rest of your life. Who sent you? No one sent me, Natasha said. Do not. No one sent me. She was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You have the whole story except the only part that matters, and you've built it upside down. You think I came here to hurt them. She leaned forward, and now it was she who did not blink. I came here because your master's wife spent the last 4 minutes of her life holding my hand and begging me to. The room went absolutely still. You're lying, Do-hyun said, but something had changed in his voice. She was conscious when they brought her in, Natasha said, and the words came out of her now in a rush. 8 months of them. Words she had never said aloud to a living soul. That's the part no one put in a report, because she was gone before the family arrived, and there was nothing anyone could do, and it changed nothing. Medically, it changed nothing. But she was awake. Her injuries were, she knew. She knew she was dying, and a dying woman does not spend her last minutes screaming or weeping if there is one thing left in the world she needs to say. She held my hand so hard she left marks, and she made me promise, and she gave me 2 names. Natasha's hand rose to her collar, and this time she did not hide it. She drew out the locket and opened it and turned it so that Do-hyun could see the small cut photograph and the folded scrap of paper. Seo-yun, Min-joon. Find them. Protect them. That is why I am here. I have been trying to find the courage to walk up that drive for 8 months. Do-hyun stared at the locket. His jaw had gone tight. There's more, Natasha said quietly. And you already know there is, because you don't believe the accident either. I can see it in how you built this folder. You've been hunting something for 8 months and hitting walls, and it's eating you alive, and that's why you've watched me like a threat. Because if I'm not a coincidence, then something you've been afraid of is true. She held his eyes. She was murdered, Mr. Jang. Your master's wife was murdered, and she knew who did it. Because with the last breath in her body, after she gave me her children's names, I asked her who I was protecting them from, and she answered. Say it, Do-hyun whispered. His hands had curled into fists. Say the name, she said. Natasha told him. Not Tae-jun. Never let him near Tae-jun. And then she said one word. A name. I didn't know it. I've carried it for 8 months, not knowing whose it was. Natasha swallowed. Until 11 days ago, when I walked into a breakfast room and an old man peeling a pear stood up and took both my hands and told me his name. And I nearly fainted where I stood, because it was the name a dying woman used the last strength in her body to warn me about. Do-hyun did not move, but all the color had gone out of his face. Say it, he said again, and it was not a demand now. It was a plea. Byung-ho, Natasha said. She said Byung-ho. For a long moment, Jang Do-hyun did not breathe. And then he put his face in his hands. And this hard, flat, frightening man, who had served the Kang family for 20 years, who frightened everyone, made a low, broken sound into his palms. And when he lifted his head, his eyes were wet and furious. And, for the first time, no longer alone. I found the car, he said, 4 months ago. It was supposed to have been destroyed. The uncle handled everything. The recovery, the paperwork, all of it, because Tae-jun could not so much as look at it, and the uncle was so kind, so willing to spare him. I found it in a scrapyard the family does not own, under a name I did not recognize, and it had not been crushed. It was being kept. His voice shook. The brake line had been cut, not worn, not failed. Cut cleanly, 3/4 through, so that it would hold under gentle driving and open under hard braking. On a mountain road, in a car, driven by a woman who was, I now know, on her way to tell her husband something. He looked at Natasha. I never told anyone. Do you understand? I found proof that the master's wife was killed, and I told no one. For 4 months. Because I could not work out who. Everyone with the access to do it was someone Tae-jun would die before he'd believe. And the one I feared most. He stopped. The one I feared most is the one man Tae-jun loves more than his own life. The man who raised him. If I accused Kang Byung-ho with anything less than God himself as my witness, Tae-jun would put a bullet in me and never lose a night's sleep. What did she find out? Natasha said. Yuna. What was she coming to tell him? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. The organization has been bleeding for a year, he said. Money. Routes. Men switching loyalty to a rival house in the south. One man at a time. So slowly, no one could name a leak. Tae-jun blamed himself. Said he'd taken his eye off things after the twins were born. Gone soft. He's been tearing the house apart looking for a traitor. His mouth twisted. The traitor has been sitting at the head of the breakfast table, peeling pears, waiting. Byung-ho does not want to overthrow Tae-jun. Why would he? He has something better. A nephew hollowed out by grief. 2 heirs frozen into silence. A house too broken to watch him. And time. All the time in the world. To hand the white tiger to the southern house piece by piece, and take his cut, and grieve so beautifully at every dinner. He looked ill. The wife saw it. She was sharper than all of us. She put it together, and she was coming home to tell Tae-jun, and she never made it down the mountain. Natasha felt cold all the way through. There's something else, she said slowly. Something I didn't understand until just now. She thought of the window, of 2 children who had stopped speaking. The doctors all said there was nothing wrong with the twins, nothing physical, nothing they could find. Everyone assumed it was grief. But grief doesn't usually take a child's voice entirely. Not both of them. Not for 8 months. Her heart was pounding. What if it wasn't only grief? What if one of them saw something? What if one of them knows something they were too frightened to say? Do-hyun's head came up sharply. Min-joon, Natasha whispered. He's the watcher. He guards doors. He appointed himself. At 6 years old. Guarding against what? Her hands had gone cold. The morning of the accident. Where were the children? Here, Do-hyun said. In the house. With... He stopped, and the blood drained from his face a second time. With their uncle. Byung-ho kept them that morning, so that Yuna could go into the city. He offered. He was so kind. The 2 of them looked at each other across the folder, and the same thought arrived in both of them at once, cold and complete. And it was the worst thought Natasha had ever had. If Min-joon had seen his uncle do something to his mother's car. If a 6-year-old boy had watched, from a window he was always watching from, and understood just enough to be terrified into silence, but not enough to name it, then the twins were not merely grieving children the old man mourned so tenderly at every meal. They were witnesses, and they were beginning, after 8 months, to talk. Do-hyun was on his feet now, pacing the small dark room like a caged thing. Why you? He said suddenly, rounding on her. A woman holds a stranger's hand for 4 minutes in a trauma bay. People die under a nurse's hands every week. You do not throw away your life for each of them. Why did you carry this for 8 months? Why did you cross the city and stand in the rain? What is she to you? And Natasha, who had never told anyone, told him. Because I had already failed one child, she said. Her voice was very quiet. 2 years before that night, in Chicago, a little boy in my unit. His heart was, it doesn't matter now what it was. I was the one holding his hand when it stopped. I was the one who had promised his mother an hour before that everything was going to be all right. She looked at her own hands. He was my son, Mr. Jang. Micah. He was 4. I had spent 9 years saving other people's children, and I could not save my own. And I quit, and I ran, and I came to a city on the other side of the earth where no one knew my face, and I sat in the dark, and I decided I was finished, that I would never stand at the foot of another child's bed as long as I lived. She lifted her eyes, and then a dying woman I had never met grabbed my hand and begged me to protect her 2 children. 2 children who were still alive. 2 children I could still reach. Her jaw tightened. Do you understand now? She did not give me a burden that night. She gave me the only thing that could pull me out of that dark room. She gave me back a reason. I did not come here to hurt these children. I came because they are the only thing standing between me and drowning, and I will burn this house down before I let that man put them in the sea. Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment, and whatever he had been searching her face for since the night she arrived, he found it. He gave a single slow nod, and something passed between them that was not quite trust yet, but was close enough to stand on. Then God help us both, he said, unknowingly borrowing the old man's own phrase, because we have almost no proof, no time, and one chance to be believed by a man who will want to kill us both for saying it. They did not have as much time as they thought, because grief makes people watchful, and Byung-ho had spent 8 months watching. It was, after all, his cover, and he had not survived 70 years in the world of the white tiger by missing things. He had noticed that the frozen children were thawing. He had noticed the way So-yun's eyes now followed the black woman around a room. He had heard, that very evening, from a maid who did not understand what she was reporting, that little So-yun had spoken at the window, and that the master had wept in the hallway, and that the boy had said his sister's name. And Kang Byung-ho, who loved nothing in this world except himself, had sat alone in his room with a cup of cooling tea and understood, with the clean, cold logic that had made him what he was, that a talking child was a problem, and that 2 talking children were a catastrophe, and that the woman who had made them talk was the most dangerous person to enter that house in 8 months. He came down to breakfast the next morning with a plan already made and a smile already fixed, and he was, as ever, wonderful. I have been selfish, he announced, over the porridge, spreading his soft old hands. I have kept these children locked in this house of sadness because I could not bear to be parted from them, and it has done them no good. Look at them, pale as ghosts. They need the sea. He beamed at the twins. My house on Jeoje. The air, the water, the boats. Yuna always said the island was the only place the children truly slept. He said the dead woman's name so tenderly. I'll take them for a week. Just their old uncle and the 2 of them and me ran to help. Let them run on the sand. Tae-jun, you work yourself to death. You cannot go, I know. So let me do this one thing. Let me give them the sea. And Natasha, standing against the wall with a cup going cold in her hands, watched Kang Tae-jun's exhausted face open with something that had been absent from it for 8 months. Gratitude. Relief. The helpless love of a broken man for the one person left in the world he believed he could trust completely. Uncle, Tae-jun said, and his voice was thick. Thank you. Natasha set down her cup so that it would not shatter in her hand. She had, until they packed the car. She understood that with total clarity. Once Byung-ho had the twins on a remote island with no one but a frightened maid and his own men. Two children who had begun to remember and speak would not come home, and it would be so easily explained. A boating accident, the treacherous currents around Jeoje, a tragedy on top of a tragedy. The poor family, the poor old man who tried so hard. There would be white flowers again, and Byung-ho would weep, and there would be no more heirs, and no more witnesses, and no one left to see him hand the white tiger to the south. She could not go to Do-hyun. He had gone into the city before dawn, chasing the last piece of proof, the scrapyard papers that could put the cut brake line in Byung-ho's hand. She could not stop the car herself. There were a dozen armed men in the house who answered to the very family she would be accusing. There was only one person on earth who could stop those children from getting into that car. And so Natasha did the thing she had crossed an ocean to avoid. The thing she had lowered her hand from a study door, rather than do. She went to Tae-jun. She found him in the entry hall as the bags were being carried down, as Mi-ron buttoned Seo-yun's coat, and a driver warmed the car in the drive. And she took him by the arm and pulled him into the study among the face-down photographs, and shut the door. And she said the words that would either save two children or end her. "You cannot let them get in that car," she said. "Your uncle killed your wife, and if those children go to that island, he is going to kill them too." For a moment, Tae-jun simply looked at her, as if she had spoken in a language he did not know. "I was the nurse who held Yuna's hand while she died," Natasha said, fast. "All of it now, the whole locked room thrown open. I lied to you about who I am, because I was afraid, and I am done being afraid. She was murdered. Her brakes were cut. Do-hyun found the car. It was never destroyed. Your uncle kept it. She was coming to tell you Byung-ho has been selling your organization to the Southern House for a year. And he killed her to stop her. And he told your children she went on a journey so they would wait quietly instead of remembering. And I think Min-joon saw something that morning. I think that's why he stopped speaking, and now they're speaking again, and that is exactly why your uncle suddenly, urgently, needs to take them to an island." With her last breath, your wife said one name. She said Byung-ho. "Tae-jun, please." She saw it happen. She saw the grief and the exhaustion and the 8 months of trust collide in his face with the one thing more unbearable than his wife's death, which was the possibility that it had a cause, and a name, and a face he had kissed on both cheeks that very morning. And she saw his face close. "You lied to me," Tae-jun said. His voice had gone very quiet, and very cold, colder than she had ever heard it, colder than the rain. "You came into my house under a false name. You put your hands on my children. And now you stand in my wife's room and ask me to believe that the man who raised me, who buried my father, who held me while I wept over her coffin, cut her brakes." He stepped back from her as though she were something diseased. "Do you know what I think? I think Do-hyun was right about you from the start. And I was a fool who let a stranger near my children because she made my daughter open her hand. I think someone did send you. I think you are exactly the knife he warned me about. Tae-jun, don't." He said it so softly it was worse than a shout. He turned to the door. "You will be off this property within the hour. If I see you near my children again, I will not be responsible for what my men do." He opened the door, and beyond it the entry hall was bright with morning, and the bags were loaded, and kind old Byung-ho was crouched down zipping Min-joon's jacket with his soft murdering hands, smiling up at the boy, and the car was running in the drive. And Min-joon, over his uncle's shoulder, looked across the whole length of the hall, and found Natasha's eyes, and in the small pale face of the boy who had not spoken since the morning his mother died, Natasha saw something she would never forget as long as she lived. She saw that he had heard her, and that he was terrified, and that he was getting into the car anyway, because a 6-year-old cannot say no to the grandfather everyone loves, and the one person who might have saved him was being marched toward the gate by his own father. Two of Tae-jun's men had her by the arms, walking her down the marble steps and out into the bright cold morning. And Natasha did not fight them, because fighting them would change nothing, and she was saving everything she had for the only thing that might. She kept her eyes on the car in the drive, on the small shape of Min-joon being lifted toward the open door, and she called out across the gravel in a voice that cracked down the middle. "Min-joon, do not get in that car. Do you hear me? You do not have to be good anymore." A man's hand clamped over her mouth, but the boy had frozen, one foot on the running board, and he had turned to look at her, and kind old Byung-ho had crouched down beside him and was murmuring something gentle into his ear, one soft hand on the child's back, guiding him in. And then a black sedan came through the gate at 50 miles an hour, spraying gravel, and slewed sideways to a stop between the car and the house, and Jang Do-hyun came out of it before it had finished moving, and he was holding a folder above his head like a torch, and he was shouting, "Tae-jun! Stop the car! Stop the car! In the name of your father! Stop it!" Everything stopped. Kang Tae-jun stood at the top of the steps, and the whole courtyard hung suspended around him. His men, his uncle, his children, the woman his men were dragging toward the gate, and Do-hyun crossed the gravel to him with the folder open, and his voice was shaking, and it carried in the still air so that everyone heard it. "I found the car in a scrapyard in Namyeongju 4 months ago, and I have said nothing because I could not believe it either," Do-hyun said. "It was booked in under the name Baek Song-won. Do you know that name, Tae-jun? It is the name your uncle used for 11 years, before you were born, before he became respectable. His own men still call him that behind his back." He slapped a photograph down on the folder. The brake line was cut, not worn. Cut, 3/4 through. Here is the photograph. Here is the mechanic who was paid to keep the car instead of crushing it. Paid, in cash, by a man in his 70s with a soft voice and kind eyes, who told him it was a matter of family sadness, and that the family wished to forget. Another page, and here, a transfer of 400 million won from a shell account your uncle controls into a bank in Busan owned by the Nam family of the South, 3 days after Yoon-ah died. A death payment, Tae-jun. He killed her, and then he collected. Tae-jun did not move. He was looking at his uncle. And Byung-ho, still crouched by the open car door with his hand on Min-joon's back, straightened slowly, and spread his soft old hands, and smiled the warm, sad smile he had smiled at every breakfast for 8 months. "Tae-jun-ah," he said gently, "Do-hyun has always been jealous of my place in your heart. And this woman is a liar and a stranger with a false name. You said so yourself, 1 hour ago. Are you truly going to stand in your own drive and let them poison you against the man who carried you on his shoulders to your father's grave?" He shook his silver head, so sorrowful, so kind. "Come, the children are cold. Let me take them to the sea, and when we come back, all this ugliness will have blown over, and we will—" "I saw you." The voice was very small and very rusty, and it stopped the old man's mouth as if a hand had closed over it. Everyone turned. Min-joon had stepped back out of the car. He was standing on the gravel in his little gray coat, and he was staring up at his great-uncle, and his whole small body was shaking. And he had spoken. The boy who had not said a full sentence in 8 months had spoken. And now that the first words were out, the rest came pouring after them. 8 months of them. in the high, cracking voice of a terrified child. "I saw you," Min-joon said. "That morning, Uma's car. I was at the window. I'm always at the window. I saw you open it up and lie down under it with the shiny thing. And you cut something. And then you saw me. You looked up and you saw me watching." Tears were streaming down his face now. But he did not stop. He could not stop. "And you came upstairs and you knelt down and you held my hands and you told me it was a secret. You said if I ever told anyone what I saw, then Uma couldn't come back from her journey. You said the waiting only worked if I kept the secret. So I kept it." His voice broke completely. "I kept it for so long, Harabeoji. I didn't tell anybody. I was so good. Why didn't she come back? I was so good. And she never came back." And Kang Tae-jun made a sound that no one in that courtyard would ever forget. A sound torn out of the deepest part of a man. And Natasha, with the hand still half over her mouth, felt her knees go weak, because she understood at last the whole shape of what had been done to these children. The old man had not only murdered their mother, he had made her murder into a leash. He had taken a grieving 6-year-old boy and convinced him that his silence was the price of his mother's return. And then he had sat at the breakfast table for 8 months and watched that child guard the secret with his own broken heart, waiting for a woman who was never coming, being good, being good, being so unbearably good. The mask came off Byung-ho's face then, all at once, the way a mask comes off, not slowly, but in a single instant, revealing that there had never been anything warm behind it at all. And the thing underneath was so cold, and so old, and so entirely without a bottom to it, that even his own men took a step back. He moved fast for an old man. He caught Seo-yun by the wrist and pulled her against him and put his other hand, and there was a small silver gun in it now, produced from somewhere in his soft, expensive clothes, against the little girl's temple, and he began to back toward the car, and his voice, when it came, had lost every trace of the kind old uncle and become something flat and final. "Nobody," he said, "moves." Nobody moved. A dozen guns had come up across the courtyard. Tae-jun's men and Byung-ho's. No one certain anymore who answered to whom. And in the center of it all stood a 70-year-old man with a gun against the head of a 6-year-old girl. And there was no shot anyone could take. Except Seo-yun was not looking at the gun. Seo-yun was looking across the gravel at Natasha. And Natasha, very slowly, with the men no longer holding her because the men had far bigger problems now, sank down onto her knees in the drive so that she was small, so that she was down at the child's level, and she opened her hand, palm out, fingers spread, the same gesture that had passed between them in the rain on the very first day, the gesture that had started everything. "Seo-yun," Natasha said, and her voice was the calmest thing in that whole screaming courtyard, low and warm and steady, a voice built over 9 years for exactly this, for the worst moment in a child's life. "Look at my hand, baby, just my hand. Don't look at anything else. Remember the road? Remember I caught you? I've got you. I'm right here, and I have got you, and I am never going to let go. When I say run, you are going to run to me, and I am going to catch you, just like I caught you from the truck. Do you understand? You don't have to be brave, sweetheart. You just have to run." "She will not," Byung-ho began. "Run," Natasha said. And Seo-yun, who trusted this woman more than she had trusted anyone in 8 months, dropped straight down out of the old man's grip, the way only a child can. All dead weight and slippery limbs, and she ran. And Byung-ho's gun came up an instant too late and swung after the running child. And Jang Do-hyun, who had served the Kang family for 20 years, who was there before the wife and swore he would be there after, crossed the space between them in 2 strides and put his own body between the gun and the little girl. And the shot Byung-ho fired went into Do-hyun's shoulder and spun him around. And by the time the old man had steadied the gun again, Kang Tae-jun was already on him. What happened in the next 4 seconds, Natasha did not fully see, because she had caught Seo-yun against her chest and turned her own body around the child the way she had turned it around her in the road, shielding her, pressing the little girl's face into her neck so she would not have to watch. But she heard it, and when she looked up, Kang Byung-ho was on the ground, and it was over, and the old man who had smiled at every breakfast for 8 months would never smile at anyone again. Tae-jun stood over him, breathing hard. And then he turned, and he looked at his children, Min-joon sobbing in the gravel, Seo-yun clinging to Natasha, and the boss of the White Tiger, the most feared man in the city, walked past all of it, past the body and the guns and the wreckage of everything he had believed, and he fell to his knees in the drive and gathered both of his children into his arms at last, and he wept, openly, in front of all his men, and not one of them looked away, because there was not one of them who did not understand. The proof, in the end, was overwhelming. Do-hyun's folder, the mechanic, the scrapyard, the 400 million won, the boy's testimony, the whole quiet network of small betrayals that had bled the organization for a year and led, every last thread of it, back to the smiling old man. The southern house, exposed, scattered. Do-hyun recovered from the wound in his shoulder, and Tae-jun, who did not have the words for what Do-hyun had done, gave him instead the only thing he knew how to give, which was everything. His right hand, his trust, the second chair that had sat empty in his heart since a woman died on a mountain road. And it was Do-hyun, in the weeks that followed, who quietly began the work that Yuna had died trying to start. The slow, careful turning of the White Tiger away from the darkness, because both men had learned, at a price too terrible to speak of, exactly what that darkness cost the people who slept in the house. But that is not the part of this story worth remembering. This is, 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Saturday, Natasha sat on the floor of the great front room with the twins, and she took the locket from around her neck, and she opened it, and she showed them the small cut photograph of their mother's smiling face. "I want to tell you something," she said, "about the last time I saw your mother, because I did see her. On the day she went away, I was the one who took care of her, and I have been carrying something for the 2 of you, for a long time, waiting until you were ready to hear it." She took a breath. "Your mother was very badly hurt, and she knew that she could not stay. But do you know what she did with the very last of her strength? With the very last breath in her whole body?" Natasha's voice stayed steady, but her eyes had filled. She did not think about herself. She did not cry. She held on to my hand, and she said 2 words, and the 2 words were your names. Seo-yun, Min-joon. She used the last of her entire life to make certain that someone would come and find you, and take care of you, and keep you safe forever. She looked from one small face to the other. "You asked me once why she didn't come back. Sweetheart, she never left you. She spent the very last thing she had, making sure that you would be all right. You never needed to keep a secret to bring her home. You never needed to be good enough. You were already the most loved children in the whole world, right up to her final breath. And you always, always will be." For a long moment, the twins were silent, and Seo-yun reached out and touched the tiny photograph of her mother's face with one finger, so gently. And then Min-joon, the watcher, the boy who had guarded a terrible secret with his whole small broken heart, looked up from the picture of his smiling mother to the face of the woman who had finally set him free. and something moved across his small features that had not been there in 8 long months. The corners of his mouth trembled and lifted, and Min-joon smiled. A real smile, wide and wet and disbelieving, like a boy who has found something he was sure was lost forever. And beside him, Seo-yun caught it the way she caught everything from her brother. And she smiled too, and then she laughed, a startled bright sound like a bird let out of a cage, and the two of them were smiling and laughing together on the floor in the sunlight, both of them at once, after 273 days of silence. Kang Tae-jun was standing in the doorway. No one had heard him come, and he watched his children smile for the first time in 8 months, and he did not make a sound, because he could not bear for it to stop. But the tears ran freely down the face of the most feared man in the city, and this time they were not tears of grief. The house changed after that, the way a house does when the thing that was frozen in it finally breaks and begins to flow. It did not happen all at once. Healing rarely does. There were still hard nights. Nights when Min-joon woke screaming from the window in his dreams, nights when Seo-yun went quiet and small and had to be coaxed back out of a room in her own mind. And Natasha sat through every one of them the way she had sat on the hallway floor that first week, patient, unhurried, refusing to leave. But the silence never came back. Once a child remembers that her voice is her own, she does not surrender it again. And one afternoon, Natasha came into the study to find Kang Tae-jun standing among the shelves of face-down photographs, the room he had not truly entered in 8 months. He was holding one of the frames in his hands, and he had turned it over, and he was looking at it, at a photograph of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a wide, unguarded smile, laughing with a baby on each hip on a beach somewhere bright. His hands were not entirely steady, and then, very carefully, as though he were setting down something that might break, he stood the photograph upright on the shelf, facing out, into the light, for the first time since the morning his world ended. And then he reached for the next one, and turned it over too, and the next. Natasha did not speak. She crossed the room and stood beside him, and together, in silence, they turned all of them back to face the room, dozens of them, a whole life turned again toward the light, until Yuna was everywhere in that study, smiling from every shelf, watching over the house she had died trying to protect. And it did not hurt the way he had feared it would. It felt, he said quietly, like letting her come home. That night, after the children were asleep, truly asleep, both of them, curled in the same bed, worn out with laughing, Tae-jun found Natasha on the landing, at the tall window that looked down the long drive to the gate. "They aren't waiting anymore," she said, when he came to stand beside her. "I noticed it tonight. Neither of them went to the window." "No," he said. He was quiet for a while. "Then, I marched you toward that gate. I called you a knife. I very nearly handed my children to their mother's murderer, and the only reason I did not is that you knelt down in my driveway and refused to give up on a family that had done nothing but frighten you since the moment you arrived." His voice was low and rough. "I do not have the words. I have never had the words. It is the great failure of my life. But I need you to know that I know what you are. You are the thing that walked into the darkest house in this city and turned all the lights back on." He turned to face her. "And I am asking you, not as an employer. I am finished with that lie. I am asking you to stay. Not only for them, for me." Natasha looked at this man, this dangerous, broken, slowly mending man, and she thought of a little boy named Micah, whose hand she had held 2 years and an ocean ago, and she understood something at last that she had crossed the whole world running from, and had finally, in this house of all houses, stopped running long enough to learn. That love does not replace what we have lost. Nothing replaces it. But love does not have to replace it. Love only has to grow beside it, in the same soil, watered by the same tears, until the grief and the joy are so tangled together at the root that you cannot pull up the one without the other. And, in time, you no longer want to. I lost a son, she told him. I never thought I would have a reason to stay anywhere again. And now? He asked. She looked down the long drive, at the gate that no one was watching anymore, at the lights of the city she had come to hide inside, and had, instead, been found in. Now, she said, I have 3. If this story kept you hooked, there's plenty more waiting for you in my ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. You'll get 15 complete stories, 20 audiobooks, and 5 exclusive bonus stories not available on YouTube. Click the link in the description, or simply scan the QR code by pausing the video and opening your phone's camera to get instant access in just a few moments. I can't wait for you to discover your next favorite love story. If this story moved you tonight, do the 3 things that help this channel most before you go. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Share this video with someone whose heart needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments the single biggest lesson you are carrying away with you. I read every single one, and I am so grateful you stayed with me all the way to the end. Because in the end, this was never really a story about a mafia boss, or a murder, or a secret buried beneath 8 months of silence. It was a story about the strange arithmetic of the human heart, about how a woman who could not save her own child crossed an ocean and saved 2 who were not hers, and how, in the saving of them, she was saved herself. About how the coldest house can be warmed by the one person brave enough to walk into it unafraid. And about how sometimes, when we have lost everything and turned all of our photographs to face the wall, love arrives without permission, in the middle of the rain, wearing a stranger's face, and reaches out one open hand, and asks us only, gently, to stop being brave for a moment, and simply run toward it. 2 children smiled again after 8 months of winter, and it began the way the truest things so often do, with a single hand, quietly opening,